Call Me Francis Tucket. Here we are at chapter 8. Remember, he's out on the plains with his mare and a mule, and he's been hungry. He got something to eat the night before. He actually hunted something, and here it is. The next morning was different. He started right, ate some meat and drank water, made sure all his gear was finally dry, and was moving well before dawn. Morning light revealed that the line of bluffs to the north had come to a shallow end, and he swung straight north on the off chance that he would run into the wagon train. It was a beautiful day, and the mare was frisky, so he let her run for a mile to burn it out, loping easily, and was amazed to see the mule keep up handily. Whoa! He held the mare down and studied the mule. It had filled out beautifully in just 2 days of constant eating and wasn't breathing hard, though it had loped a mile. "You actually look younger," Francis said aloud. "Maybe we can rig a pack saddle up later and amuse you." He set out again, holding the mare to a fast walk, his eyes sweeping the grass in front of them, and at 2 hours he found a track. Actually, if he'd blinked, he would have missed it. It wasn't a track so much as a faint line across the prairie heading west, a blemish in the grass that could only be seen when the light was exactly right. It was not left by a train, probably by a single wagon, but it was something, a track which was better than he'd had before, and he turned to follow it. It must have been made before the rain, and the grass the wagon had run over had been broken enough to stay at least partially down. When Francis dismounted and felt down in the grass, he could feel slight indentions in the prairie sod, barely half an inch deep. He remounted and followed the track, which seemed to go west by slightly south, and tried not to hope. It was only midday, but by late afternoon the tracks seemed to have faded more, and he was having trouble following them. It had struck him as odd that a single wagon would come out here alone, but there was something drawing him on, and he decided to give it another hour or two before turning back to the west. The country was the same, rolling flat, or what seemed to be flat, with shallow dips into more flatness. He thought he could see for miles, and he couldn't see anything like a wagon, and at last he decided to end the run and cut north again. His turn to the north took him onto a low rise, and at the top of the rise he happened to glance left, and something caught his eye. He stopped and studied it. Way off, over a mile, there was something round sticking up out of the grass. It wasn't white quite, but a gray color, a gray spot, and he realized it was tarp, canvas, and that he was looking at the top of a covered wagon. The mare turned west again, without his meaning to turn her, answering pressure from his knees, and he nudged her into the fast walk. If it was a wagon, it would have people, and if there were people, they might now know where they were or where the main wagon train was. But as he drew closer, he felt a strangeness about the wagon. It was stopped dead as if camped. But he could see no stock, no sign of life, and there wasn't any smoke from a cook fire. He stopped 100 yards from the wagon and sat on the mare, his thumb on the hammer of his rifle. "Hello," he answered. He called. No answer. "Hello at the wagon. Is anybody there?" Silence. For a second he thought he had heard a small sound, almost a whimper, but it could have come from the mare or the mule breathing. "I'm coming in, and I'm friendly." Still he sat, tensed, waiting for any sign of movement or threat. Again he thought he heard a small sound, but it was so soft he could not be sure, and other than that, nothing. The mule ended it. He had been standing in back of the mare, but he saw the wagon and decided to investigate, and walked past the mare and went up to the wagon. Nothing happened, and Francis took it as a good sign, and he thumped his heels against the mare's ribs and moved to the wagon. "Hello," he said again, but there was no answer. He could find no sign of life until he came to the rear of the wagon and looked inside. There were 2 children sitting on a quilt, a girl and a boy, their eyes wide with fright. The girl was 8 or 9, wearing a sunbonnet with most of the stiffener out of the brim, so it drooped. The boy was 5 or 6. Both of them were blond and covered with freckles, and Francis stared at them. As Francis stared at them, finding children was the last thing he had expected to do, the girl had made a sound, a cry, and Francis recognized it was the sound he'd heard. "Where are your folks?" Francis looked around the wagon and could see nothing. "And how did the wagon get here? Where are your animals?" The boy jumped at the sound and stuck a thumb into his mouth and started sucking. The girl seemed startled as well but seemed to have more spunk than the boy. "Are you a savage?" she asked. "Are you one of them savages?" Francis shook his head. "I don't think so. My name is Francis. What is yours?" She relaxed. "I'm Charlotte, but folks all called me Lottie. This is Billy. Of course it's William and not Billy, but Billy is the short way of saying William, just like Lottie is a short for Charlotte. And ain't that the strangest thing? Who would think Billy would come from William instead of it being Willie or just plain Will?" Francis held up his hand. "Easy, easy. I like to talk," she said. "Sometimes it gets away from me a little." Francis nodded. It's like it's like there's a place in me full of words. When I open the door to the place, they just start coming, and I can't seem to stop. Again, Francis held up his hand. "We have other things to talk about now. Where are your folks?" "Folk," he said. "It was just Pa. Ma went on must have been 2 years ago when some crew came and took her. Pa decided to go west, but he got the water sickness, and they made us leave the train." "Water sickness?" Francis stopped her again. "You mean cholera?" She nodded. "That's the one. He was taken sick, and we came out here so he could get well, except that he didn't get well, I mean. It started to take him down, and he left us with some flour and biscuits that he made and took off walking until he got over it so we wouldn't take the sickness from him." "How long ago was that?" "Cholera," Francis thought. Cholera. They said it came from drinking bad water, but nobody was sure, and he wondered if he could catch it just by being close to the children. "When did he go off?" "It's been 2 days and a little more now." She hesitated, and Francis saw a tear come down her cheek and saw that Billy was crying as well, and perhaps had been the whole time. "He ain't coming back, is he?" "Some died in a day," Francis had heard. "Some had a fever in the morning and were dead by noon." The man had gone off to die alone to protect his children, although leaving them alone in the prairie was close to a death sentence. Pushing the sick ones out was the only protection wagon trains had, getting the sick ones away from the unsick people. But it still seemed a brutal thing to Francis, pushing these children out with their sick father when they obviously weren't sick, making them go it alone. Except, Francis thought, they weren't alone. Not now. He couldn't leave them. They wouldn't last a week, and they weren't sick, or didn't appear to be. "Wait here," he said. "I'm going to look around a bit. I'll be back." He left them in the wagon and started searching out and around the wagon. He was looking for the father on the off chance that he had survived. Some had, he knew, although it left them sickly, and he didn't have to leave the man here if he wasn't dead. He found the father on the fourth circle around the wagon. He had gone a good distance, 200 yards, before settling into the grass. Francis read the sign. He was flat on his back and very dead, although the coyotes and wolves hadn't been at him yet. His arms were at his sides, and he had a peaceful look at his face. If, Francis thought, dead people can have any look, and it looked like he'd been sitting just laid back when death came. I should bury him, Francis thought, but he knew he couldn't. He shouldn't even be this close, and he backed the mare away, shaking his head. He hated to leave, but the sickness could still be there, still be around the body, and he didn't want to take any chances. He'd have to leave the body. He went straight back to the wagon where the children still sat inside on the quilt. "Did you find Pa?" Lottie asked. Francis didn't answer the question, but instead scanned the prairie around the wagon again. "Didn't you have horses or oxen when you came?" Lottie nodded. "2 horses, Buck and Booger, but Pa let them loose just before he got bad sick, and something ran them off." Wolves, Francis thought. "They're probably dead, and if not, they're so far away I could never find them." "What are we going to do?" Lottie asked, and Francis thought. That's it exactly. As Cortwaller would have said, what could he do? Suddenly he was not alone. He had 2 children to care for, and nothing else had changed. He didn't know where he was or where to go. Didn't know anything except now there were 3 of them instead of just 1. He shook his head. It would have to be taken a step at a time, and one thing was sure, they couldn't stay here. "Get your stuff together," he told Lottie, "and Billy's, too. We're going to go." "Where?" Lottie asked. Good question, Francis thought, and I don't have the tiniest part of an answer. But he smiled, a smile he didn't really feel, and pointed with his chin. "West," he said. We're going to go west. Wow. What a situation. There we go. Call me Francis Tucket. See ya. Bye.